They say never get involved with strangers in a midnight parking lot. But seeing that mother's eyes, wide with the panic of hunted prey, made me break my own survival rules. I only meant to pay $150 for diapers and formula to get the security guard off her back. I had no idea that single rushed nod of gratitude would drag me into a deadly game of betrayal and brutal revenge. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Kaylee Reed. I am 35 years old, and for the past several years, my life has been a strict exercise in invisibility. After a past trauma that taught me the hard way about the dangers of standing out, I built a quiet, solitary existence. I work as a data inventory clerk for a private logistics company called Apexium Freight Services in Tacoma, Washington. It is a job that deals entirely in numbers, barcodes, and predictable shipping routes. Nothing unpredictable ever happens in a warehouse data center, and that is exactly the way I need it to be. But Tacoma is a city that breathes cold rain and harbors gray shadows, and some nights, trouble finds you even when you are hiding. It was a Tuesday evening, raining so heavily the water felt like ice against the skin. I had stopped at a local Walmart to pick up some basic groceries. The fluorescent lights inside flickered slightly, casting a sickly pale glow over the linoleum floors. I was heading toward the self-checkout when I heard a commotion near the main exit. "Empty the bag. Right now." The voice belonged to a heavily built security guard, his large hand gripping the thin arm of a woman holding a bundled infant. The woman was soaked, her clothes hanging loosely off her frail frame. She was trembling, trying to shield the baby from the harsh glare of the overhead lights and the accusing stares of late-night shoppers. "Please," she whispered, her voice strained. "My baby is hungry. I just need these." The guard sneered, yanking a plastic store bag from her grasp. Diapers, a few cans of powdered infant formula, and baby wipes spilled onto the floor. "Save it for the police. You think I do not see you people every single night?" I do not usually intervene in the affairs of strangers. Survival in the modern world means keeping your head down. But the baby let out a raspy, desperate cry that tore right through the damp, oppressive atmosphere of the store. I walked over, pulling my wallet from my heavy coat pocket. "How much is it?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. The guard blinked, sizing me up. "Total comes to exactly $150. But it is store policy to—" "I am paying for it," I interrupted, handing him my credit card. "Ring it up as a normal retail sale. No police, no paperwork. Just let her go." He grumbled, scanning the items with deliberate slowness. As he did, I turned my attention to the woman. That was when the anomalies began to register in my mind. My job at Apexium requires me to spot discrepancies in massive data sets, and this woman was a walking discrepancy. Despite her disheveled clothes and the hollow look in her cheeks, she did not look like someone who had been living on the cold streets or struggling with a long-term addiction. When she reached down to gather the fallen cans of formula, I noticed her hands. They were remarkably clean. The skin was not cracked or weathered by the elements, and her fingernails, though unpolished, were neatly and professionally manicured. More importantly, I watched how she held her child. She was not just cradling the infant for warmth. Her arm was locked in a rigid protective brace around the baby's midsection, pressing a distinct, rectangular bulge against her own ribs. It was tucked securely inside the thick layers of the diaper blanket. It was far too small and hard to be a bottle or a container of food. It looked exactly like a heavy-duty, encrypted USB drive. She stood up, and our eyes met. It was not the gaze of a grateful, desperate shoplifter. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, and terrifyingly alert. In a fraction of a second, Her gaze swept past me, tracking the exact position of the two ceiling-mounted security cameras, analyzing the blind spots with a reflex that only comes from specialized, rigorous training. "Thank you," she said. The voice did not match the ragged clothes. It was smooth, highly educated, and completely devoid of any regional street slang. It was the voice of a professional who was used to giving precise orders, not begging for mercy in a supermarket lobby. "Just get the baby somewhere warm," I replied. She nodded once, a hurried, tense movement, and rushed out the sliding glass doors into the freezing downpour. I grabbed my printed receipt and followed a few paces behind, stepping out under the exterior awning. I watched her sprint toward the darkest corner of the sprawling parking lot, throwing herself into a beat-up, rusted SUV. The engine sputtered briefly before roaring to life. But as her red taillights flared, movement in the adjacent parking aisle caught my immediate attention. An unmarked black sedan, sleek and completely out of place in this rundown neighborhood, quietly slipped out of a parking space. It had no front or rear license plates. Its headlights remained completely off as it glided through the heavy rain, turning in the exact same direction the woman had gone. It was tracking her. My stomach dropped. Every survival instinct I had honed over the years screamed at me to walk away, to get in my own car and forget I ever saw her face. Instead, I pulled out my cellular phone. Through the driving rain, I zoomed in and snapped a rapid burst of photographs of the fleeing SUV just before it turned onto the main arterial road. I could not get a plate number in the dark, but the camera clearly caught a massive, distinct scrape along the rear bumper of her vehicle. I lowered my phone, the cold rain soaking completely through my coat. I had just paid $150 to save a starving mother. Now, I realized I had just financed the escape of a hunted woman. 3 days passed in absolute silence. The rhythmic hum of the Apexium Freight Services servers had almost lulled me back into my false sense of security. Then, on Friday afternoon at exactly 2 o'clock, the real world smashed through the glass doors of my office. 2 men in immaculately tailored black suits bypassed the front reception desk entirely. They moved with the silent, synchronized efficiency of apex predators. My floor manager tried to intercept them, but one of the men simply flashed a leather-bound badge. The manager went pale and stepped back, retreating into his cubicle. The taller of the two stopped at my desk. "Kaylee Reed, you are coming with us." "Am I under arrest?" I asked, keeping my hands visible on my keyboard. "We are taking a ride," the second man said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. He stepped forward and smoothly confiscated my cellular phone from the desk, powering it down instantly. All of my communications to the outside world were severed in a matter of seconds. I was escorted out of the building and guided into the back of a heavily armored black sport utility vehicle. The windows were tinted so darkly I could barely see the interstate as we drove north. After a tense, silent journey lasting nearly 45 minutes, we arrived in the affluent, heavily wooded suburbs of Seattle. The vehicle approached massive wrought iron gates that slid open automatically. We entered a sprawling estate that felt less like a home and more like a high-security military installation. Armed private contractors patrolled the perimeter, and surveillance cameras tracked our every movement from the stone pillars. The sheer scale of the wealth and power on display was meant to be intimidating, and it worked. I was a civilian data clerk sitting in the belly of a steel fortress. The agents marched me through the grand foyer, its marble floors echoing with each footstep, and led me into a cavernous, dimly lit study smelling of old paper and expensive tobacco. Behind a massive mahogany desk sat a man who commanded the room without even standing up. General Arthur Vance. Even someone entirely disconnected from politics like me recognized his face. He was a retired military commander with unparalleled influence, a man who pulled the invisible strings of national defense and political lobbying from the shadows. "Sit down, Miss Reed," General Vance commanded. His voice was gravelly, carrying the weight of a man accustomed to absolute obedience. I took the heavy leather chair across from him. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He slid a high-resolution color photograph across the polished wood. It was a still image taken from the Walmart security feed. It showed me standing next to the ragged woman, handing my credit card to the cashier. "Her name is Sarah," the general said, his voice dropping a fraction, revealing a sudden vulnerable crack in his armor. "She is my only daughter, and the infant in her arms is my grandson." I kept my expression entirely neutral, but my heart began to pound heavily against my ribs. "Why are you showing this to me?" General Vance leaned forward, intertwining his scarred fingers. "Sarah vanished exactly 8 months ago. She took the boy and wiped her digital footprint completely clean. Up until Tuesday night, we had no confirmed sightings. If she is missing, you should call the police, General." He let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "The police cannot help her. My daughter is currently the target of a classified, off-the-books manhunt. The intelligence community believes she stole highly sensitive national defense documents and has been dealing with an international terrorist syndicate." He paused, the heavy silence pressing against my eardrums. "I do not believe it," Vance continued, his eyes hardening. "But if the federal agencies find her first, she will be tried in a secret military court and locked in a black site for the rest of her natural life. Or worse. I need to find my daughter before they do. You were the last person to speak to her. I need to know everything she said, everywhere she looked, and exactly which direction she went." I opened my mouth to give him a sanitized version of the truth, to tell him she just said thank you and drove away. But as I shifted in my seat, my eyes drifted to a silver-framed photograph sitting on the corner of his massive desk. It was a picture of General Vance in full-dress uniform, standing shoulder to shoulder with a younger, sharply dressed military officer. "That is Colonel Marcus," Vance noted, catching my line of sight. "My most trusted subordinate. He has been coordinating my private search efforts." I stared at the photograph, the blood freezing in my veins. My mind raced back to the freezing rain, the rusted vehicle speeding away, and the black sedan creeping through the dark parking lot. I zoomed in on the memory just as clearly as I had zoomed in with my phone camera. Colonel Marcus was wearing a distinctive, custom-forged silver lapel pin. It was shaped like a bird of prey clutching a sword. It was the exact same metal ornament I had seen dangling from the rearview mirror of the unmarked black sedan that was hunting Sarah in the dark. General Vance was not commanding the search to save his daughter. He was unknowingly financing the man who was hunting her down. "I do not know where she went, General," I lied smoothly, forcing my breathing to remain perfectly steady. "She barely spoke a word. She took her groceries and vanished into the rain. However, my firm handles extensive civil logistics. We monitor traffic flows and freight routes across the entire Pacific Northwest. If you give me permission to return to my office, I can use our routing software to search for anomalies or traffic camera triggers near that commercial zone on that specific night." General Vance studied my face for a long, suffocating moment. He was a man who hunted liars for a living, but I had spent my entire adult life perfecting the art of being unnoticeable. Finally, he nodded slowly. He instructed his men to return me to Tacoma, demanding I report any findings directly to him. I walked out of that fortress knowing I was walking a tightrope over a blazing inferno. If I handed the photograph of the scratched utility vehicle over to Vance, Colonel Marcus would intercept the data immediately. Marcus was controlling the flow of information to the general. If I exposed the colonel without concrete proof, I would likely suffer a fatal, highly classified accident before sunrise. I had to find Sarah first. The American public operates under a comforting, naive illusion of privacy. People believe their movements belong to them. They do not realize that every commercial delivery truck, municipal bus, and long-haul freight carrier is a rolling surveillance station. At Apexium, we monitor thousands of 18-wheelers equipped with continuous, high-definition dashboard cameras. They record every highway mile, every license plate, and every vehicle they pass. Operating under the radar of my own company, I bypassed the standard firewalls and initiated a deep query into our raw visual database. I set the parameters strictly for a dark-colored, late-model utility vehicle with a severe, unique scrape along the rear passenger side, cross-referencing timestamps radiating outward from the supermarket coordinates. It took 36 agonizing hours of running illegal background scripts to get a hit. A massive freight truck carrying lumber had captured 3 seconds of footage on a rural highway, heading toward the industrial outskirts of Olympia. There was the rusted vehicle, weaving erratically through the heavy traffic. But as I honed in on the coordinates, I realized Colonel Marcus was not passively waiting for me to fail. He was actively making sure I stayed in line. The intimidation began on a Thursday evening. I was driving home on a rain-slicked interstate when a heavy reinforced pickup truck suddenly merged violently into my lane. There was no horn, no warning. The massive grille of the truck forced my smaller sedan entirely off the asphalt and onto the gravel shoulder. My passenger side mirror shattered against a concrete barrier. The truck sped away without braking. The next morning, the warning escalated. I walked into my apartment kitchen to find my coffee maker turned on and brewing. My front door deadbolt was fully engaged, and nothing was missing, but someone had clearly been inside my sanctuary. It was a precise, bloodless threat. It meant they could touch me whenever they wanted. If I stayed in my normal routine, Marcus would have me killed the moment I got too close. I needed to vanish completely. I requested an emergency personal leave from my floor manager, citing a sudden family illness. I booked a digital train ticket to Spokane under my real name, establishing a false electronic trail. Then, I powered on my registered cellular phone and dropped it into the luggage compartment of an eastbound commercial bus. Anyone tracking my global positioning signal would think I was fleeing across the state. I purchased a cheap prepaid handset with untraceable cash. I changed into a heavy, dark, oversized jacket, pulled down a neutral baseball cap, and spent the next 7 hours using 3 different cash-only transit systems to double back south toward Olympia. I watched every reflection in every window, making sure the ghosts sent by Marcus were truly gone. By midnight, I stood in front of a decaying motor lodge sitting entirely off the main grid. A neon sign buzzed aggressively in the wet air, missing half of its glowing red letters. The concrete walkways were cracked, smelling of cheap beer and damp soil. I stopped in front of room number 42. I did not knock. Instead, I slid a small piece of folded paper under the door with a single sentence written on it. I am the woman who bought the formula. 10 excruciating seconds passed. The door opened a fraction of an inch, revealing the cold, dark barrel of a compact handgun pointed directly at my chest. Then, the safety chain slid back, and the door swung open. Sarah looked like a ghost wrapped in a fragile human shell. Deep purple circles framed her sunken, hyper-alert eyes. She quickly pulled me inside and locked 3 separate deadbolts behind me. The room was suffocatingly small and smelled of stale smoke, but my eyes were immediately drawn to the wobbly wooden desk in the corner. Sitting on it was a heavily modified laptop connected to a web of external wires. Lines of complex decryption code raced across the glowing screen, and shoved securely into the primary port was the thick metallic drive I had seen hidden in the diaper blanket. She was fighting a digital war in a rotting motel room, desperately trying to break the encryption to save her own life. I looked past the blinking machinery toward the center of the sagging mattress. There, surrounded by a makeshift fortress of impeccably clean, soft pillows, her infant son slept soundly. Despite the grime of the room and the absolute terror of their situation, the baby was completely spotless. He was warm, perfectly fed, and completely insulated from the nightmare hunting his mother. She had sacrificed every ounce of her own well-being to ensure his perfect safety. "You should not have found me," Sarah whispered, her grip tightening on the pistol. You brought them right to us. I am clean, I replied, holding my empty hands up. I lost the men hunting you, but you need to know who sent them. Your father is looking for you, Sarah, but the man leading his search party is the man trying to kill you. At the mention of the colonel, the heavy pistol trembled in Sarah's hands. The fierce, calculated armor she had worn at the supermarket suddenly shattered. She lowered the weapon, her knees giving out completely, and sank onto the edge of the sagging mattress. She buried her face in her free hand, her shoulders shaking silently. I knew it, she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. I knew he was controlling the narrative, but to hear that my father actually believes him. I pulled up a cracked plastic chair and sat opposite her. What exactly is Marcus doing? Why is he hunting you with a black ops team? Sarah wiped her eyes, taking a deep, ragged breath. When she looked up, the vulnerability was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. Marcus is running an unauthorized, highly lucrative shadow enterprise right under the nose of the Department of Defense, she explained, gesturing toward the humming laptop. He is using authorized military logistics channels to smuggle high-grade technology to the black market. We are talking about advanced drone guidance systems, classified cryptographic hardware, and next-generation ballistics. He reroutes the cargo through civilian shipping fronts, declares them lost or destroyed in transit, and sells them to international syndicates for tens of millions of dollars. I absorbed the information, my mind immediately snapping to the logistics side of it. It was a massive, highly coordinated operation. I was working as an independent compliance auditor for my father, Sarah continued. 8 months ago, I noticed a tiny, almost invisible discrepancy in a procurement ledger. I dug deeper and accidentally accessed a restricted terminal used by Marcus. I saw the phantom manifests. I saw the offshore bank routing numbers. And he realized you were inside the system, I said. She nodded grimly. Before I could secure a hard copy of the evidence, he initiated a total purge. But he did not just erase his tracks. He used his supreme clearance level to completely fabricate a digital paper trail framing me. He planted doctored communications and forged financial records on my personal servers. Overnight, he transformed me from a loyal daughter into a treasonous operative selling state secrets to foreign enemies. The sheer scale of the betrayal was staggering. Why not just go straight to your father? You are his daughter. He would at least listen to you. Sarah let out a bitter, hopeless laugh. You have been inside that fortress. Marcus commands the entire security detail. He controls my father's telecommunications, his schedules, and his personal guards. Every phone line is tapped. Every email is filtered. If I walked up to those front gates, Marcus's men would intercept me before I ever saw my father. I would be found dead in a cheap motel the next morning, and the official report would call it a tragic suicide by a guilty, unstable woman. She turned her head, her gaze softening as she looked at her sleeping son. The baby stirred slightly, and she instinctively reached out to gently smooth the blanket over him. The air in the room shifted, thick with an overwhelming, desperate maternal instinct. I do not care about clearing my name anymore, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a fierce, trembling register. I do not care if history remembers me as a traitor. But if Marcus finds us, he will not just kill me. He will take my son. He will use my baby as a permanent, invisible hostage to ensure my father never questions his operations again. I will burn the entire world to ashes before I let that monster touch my child. I looked at the young mother, stripped of her life, her reputation, and her family, forced to hide in a filthy room to protect the only thing she had left. A profound, searing anger ignited in my chest. It was the same familiar, suffocating rage I had buried deep inside myself years ago. It was the realization that the powerful could crush the innocent without consequence, simply because they controlled the system. Calling the federal authorities was out of the question. A man like Marcus would have informants in every law enforcement agency in the state. handing Sarah over to the police would be an absolute death sentence. If I wanted to save her, and if I wanted to ensure Marcus never hurt another person again, we could not rely on the law. We had to use the one thing I understood better than anyone else. We had to use the supply chain. "We are not going to run anymore," I said quietly, the cold certainty in my voice surprising even me. "And we are not going to hide." Sarah looked at me, confusion mixing with the fear in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" "Marcus thinks he is untouchable because he controls the military infrastructure," I replied, standing up and walking toward the laptop. "But to move his stolen weapons, he relies on civilian freight networks. My networks. He took your life away with a keyboard. I am going to use mine to completely destroy his." I bought a second untraceable prepaid phone and dialed the private emergency contact number I had memorized from General Vance's desk file. The line rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. "Colonel Marcus speaking." "I have the woman," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "And I have the hard drive she was hiding." A heavy silence stretched across the cellular network. When Marcus finally spoke, the polished military veneer had vanished, replaced by the cold calculation of an apex predator whose territory had just been breached. "Who is this?" "Just a data clerk who realizes she stumbled into something highly lucrative," I lied smoothly, injecting just enough artificial, desperate greed into my tone to make it entirely believable. "I read the files, Colonel. I know exactly what you're moving out of the port tonight. I will hand over the physical drive and give you the exact coordinates of the motel where she is hiding. In exchange, I want $5 million in untraceable bearer bonds." Marcus let out a low, patronizing chuckle. He did not hear a genuine threat. He heard a greedy civilian entirely out of her depth, someone easily managed. $5 million is a steep price for a data clerk, but I appreciate a straightforward business transaction. Bring the drive to the grand ballroom of the Emerald Plaza Hotel in downtown Seattle tomorrow night at exactly 8 o'clock. We are hosting the annual Defense Gala. You will hand the drive to my head of security at the rear loading dock, and he will hand you a briefcase. Do not attempt to negotiate further or involve anyone else." He terminated the call immediately. He assumed I was walking blindly into a slaughterhouse. He was planning to take the drive, order his men to execute me in the dark alleyway, and then send a tactical strike team to the motel to eliminate Sarah and the baby. But I was not going anywhere near the loading dock, and the physical drive was no longer the primary weapon. While Marcus was busy preparing for his grand evening, where he was scheduled to receive a prestigious Medal of Honor from General Vance himself in front of the city's elite, I was systematically dismantling his criminal empire from the inside out. I logged into the deepest administrative tiers of the Apexium freight network. Sarah had successfully decrypted the shipping ledgers, giving me the exact container identification numbers of Marcus's contraband. 7 massive steel shipping crates loaded with stolen military technology were currently sitting at a Seattle port facility, waiting to be loaded onto a black market freighter at exactly midnight. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I completely overwrote the bills of lading. I altered the digital routing barcodes and manipulated the automated dispatch system, burying the original commands under layers of dummy code. In less than 45 minutes, I had legally and irreversibly rerouted all 7 containers. I did not send them out to the ocean. Instead, I scheduled a fleet of Apexium heavy haulers to pick them up and deliver them directly to the primary evidence warehouse of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I accompanied the digital manifest with a highly detailed, anonymous electronic tip outlining exactly what was inside the crates, complete with Marcus's forged signature. By the time the colonel realized his illicit inventory was missing, federal agents would already be cataloging the stolen weaponry. But destroying his business was only half the battle. I needed to destroy the man himself, publicly, in front of the very system he had manipulated to ruin Sarah's life. I accessed the human resources database of my own company. Apexium employed hundreds of retired military personnel as drivers and warehouse guards. I filtered the employment records meticulously, specifically searching for combat veterans who had served directly under General Arthur Vance during his active overseas deployments, men whose loyalty to the old commander was absolute and unshakable. I contacted 4 of them. I did not ask for a favor. I showed them a fraction of the decrypted evidence proving that Marcus was actively planning to assassinate their former commander's daughter. The response was immediate and terrifyingly efficient. They agreed to move in the shadows and provide absolute security. Through these loyal veterans, we secured a high-end catering uniform. We pulled Sarah's dark hair back into a tight, unrecognizable bun, adjusting the tailored vest and crisp white shirt. She left her son in the absolute safety of a trusted veteran's wife, a woman who understood the severe stakes of the night. Sarah was going into the gala disguised as a banquet server, moving invisibly among the champagne flutes and silver trays, hiding in plain sight. The final piece of the trap required neutralizing Marcus's immediate defenses. The Emerald Plaza Hotel utilized a centralized digital management system for its security doors and communication relays. Using a customized, aggressive malware package Sarah had designed during her desperate hours in the motel, I remotely infected the hotel's main operational server. At exactly 7 minutes before 8 o'clock, I initiated the payload. The malware silently crippled the encrypted radio frequencies used by Marcus's private security detail inside the ballroom. Their earpieces went completely dead, broadcasting only a faint, continuous hum of static. Simultaneously, I locked down the electronic fire doors leading to the private back exit routes, effectively trapping the colonel's men inside the perimeter without any way to coordinate a quiet evacuation. I stood across the street from the glowing hotel, the cold rain misting against my dark jacket. I checked the time on my screen. The trap was perfectly set. The jaws were locked, and the hunter was positioned exactly in the center of the cage, completely unaware that he had just become the prey. The grand ballroom of the Emerald Plaza Hotel was a sea of polished brass, crisp dress uniforms, and glittering evening gowns. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low murmur of the city's political and military elite. I stood quietly in the shadows near the secondary soundboard, dressed in a plain black suit I had borrowed from one of the loyal veterans. On the main stage, General Arthur Vance stood behind a podium draped in heavy velvet. His face was stern, carrying the immense burden of a man who believed his only daughter was a traitor. Next to him stood Colonel Marcus, his chest puffed out, an arrogant smile playing on his lips as he prepared to receive the highest medal of honor for his supposedly flawless service. Marcus stepped forward, raising his hand to graciously silence the polite applause. This was his pinnacle. He believed he was completely untouchable. I looked down at the glowing screen of my cellular phone. I took a slow, deep breath and pressed the execution key. Above the stage, the massive digital projection screen, which had been displaying a looping montage of the colonel's military achievements, suddenly went completely black. A harsh burst of static tore through the ballroom's heavy sound system, making several high-ranking officers flinch. Then, a voice echoed through the massive space. It was not a pre-recorded speech of gratitude. It was a raw, intercepted audio file. "I do not care how many men it takes," Marcus's voice hissed from the towering speakers, undeniably clear and dripping with malice. "Find the general's daughter. Eliminate her. Make it look like a tragic suicide, and secure the infant. The baby is my permanent leverage." A collective gasp ripped through the crowd of hundreds. General Vance froze, the gleaming metal slipping from his fingers and clattering loudly against the polished wooden floor. Before Marcus could even open his mouth to deny the recording, the massive screen behind him ignited again. This time, it displayed crystal-clear, high-definition video of his black market shipments. The footage seamlessly transitioned into scrolling offshore bank statements, highlighting tens of millions of dollars routed through fake shell corporations, directly linked to his personal identification numbers. "Cut the feed!" Marcus screamed, his face twisting into a mask of absolute panic. "Guards! Arrest that woman by the soundboard! She is a hostile operative!" 4 of his private security men lunged toward me from the perimeter, but as they instinctively reached for their holstered weapons, they froze in terror. The magazines were entirely gone. The loyal veterans I had recruited had quietly relieved them of their ammunition in the crowded hallways just minutes prior. At that exact moment, the main doors of the ballroom burst open. A tactical squad of federal agents poured into the room, their heavy weapons raised. The anonymous tip I had sent, coupled with the 7 crates of stolen military technology currently sitting in their evidence lockup, was more than enough to secure an immediate federal arrest warrant. Marcus backed away from the podium, his arrogant facade completely shattered. He was surrounded, and the fire exits were electronically sealed shut. Then, the crowd parted. From the back of the room, a woman in a caterer's uniform walked slowly down the center aisle. She reached up and pulled the tight cap from her head, letting her dark hair fall over her shoulders. Beside her walked the wife of the veteran, carefully holding a bundled infant. Sarah took her son into her own arms and stepped into the bright light of the chandeliers. General Vance stared, his entire body trembling. The hardened military commander, a man who had weathered decades of brutal war, completely broke down. Tears streamed freely down his weathered cheeks as he rushed off the stage, dropping to his knees and wrapping his arms fiercely around his daughter and his grandson. The nightmare was finally over. Federal agents slammed Marcus against the podium, securing heavy steel cuffs around his wrists. He thrashed wildly, locking eyes with me as I walked calmly toward the stage. "You think you won?" Marcus snarled, spitting the words with venomous rage. "I have a global network. I have millions hidden where the government will never find it. I will buy my way out of this, and I will kill every single person you have ever known." I stepped up onto the stage, leaning in close so only he could hear my voice over the chaos of the room. "You do not have a single dime left, Colonel," I whispered into his ear. "While you were waiting for your shiny medal, I used your decrypted administrative codes to drain every single offshore account you possess. Every last cent of your illegal fortune has already been permanently wired to hundreds of anonymous charities supporting vulnerable women across the globe. You are not just going to federal prison, you are going to prison completely broke." The color drained entirely from his face. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had lost everything. His freedom, his power, and his money were entirely gone. I turned my back on him as the agents dragged him away. I walked quietly toward the exit, ready to slip back into the comforting anonymity I preferred. Before I could reach the heavy doors, General Vance caught up to me. His eyes were red, but they held a profound, immeasurable gratitude. "Miss Reed," the general said, his voice thick with emotion, "you saved my family. You saved my entire legacy. I can give you any position you want. I can make you the most powerful civilian in the defense sector. Just name your price." I looked at the old man, then glanced back at Sarah, who was rocking her baby in the center of the room, finally safe. I smiled, a genuine feeling of peace settling over my chest for the first time in years. "I do not want a position, General," I replied softly, "but you can write me a check for exactly $150. I advanced it at a supermarket a few nights ago." He looked entirely bewildered. $150? That is all you want? "There are certain things money cannot buy," I said, pushing the heavy door open and stepping out into the cool, clear night air. "But they can begin with a single can of baby formula." Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Haley Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.